Welcome everyone to the seventh episode of Expert Speak, brought to you by Creators of Product. Today we have Anuj Rathi with us. All of us already know about him, so I'll give a very brief intro before we start the session. Anuj is one of the established product leaders in Indian startup and tech space. He started his career as an engineer. Then he worked with Flipkart in early days of Flipkart when uh, it was just a books app, and he was part of moving it from books to full-fledged e-commerce. Then he worked with Walmart for a while. Then he also helped Snapdeal scale the e-commerce part of it. For the last 4 years, he's been with Swiggy, and we have all seen where Swiggy has gone from in the last 4 years. Right now in Swiggy, he's leading revenue and growth products for consumers and restaurant partners and new offerings for the company. And he leads product marketing, program management, and product operations teams in Swiggy as well. Today, he's going to be sharing his views on how to build growth engines. And without taking much of time, over to you, Anuj, and thank you very much for taking out time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Devakar and creators of product, especially Shruti also. She's been behind my back to be doing this session with you guys. Great to actually now finally do it. And thanks once again for the brief, but kind of complete introduction about me. So I'll skip the slide which had my introduction, which was this one. So essentially, I just for recap, I lead revenue and growth at Swiggy right now. There are many areas of my interest, but some of the areas I actually get to work on very actively, including product management, product marketing. I'll probably also touch upon product operations. That's a new field that is emerging nowadays, and one of the growth engines, as Devakar also talked about, which we'll get into like much more detail. In my previous avatar, I was one of the first product managers at Flipkart. I think the first or second, I can't place exactly what, when they were just building a book selling website to actually start building proper e-commerce, enterprise. So yes, today what we are going to be talking about are like 3 or 4 main areas. These are some of them are like most of my learnings throughout these last 10 years of evolving from a product manager to a product leader, and not only a product leader but generally a leader within e-commerce and three-way marketplace companies. So some learnings probably will be helpful to you. I really hope so. So these are the 4 things that kind of will be a theme throughout our presentation. How do you evolve your organization into a robust growth engine? Not an organization which treats growth as either one of the charters of one of the sub organizations within your company. The second one is, how do you stay ahead in the game with constantly evolving customer expectations? I think Jeff Bezos said this a long time back, that the only people that we have to solve for should be our users, because they are what he said were divinely discontent. They were never content with what you have. We have been using the word new normal nowadays, but whenever you hit a new normal, there is always a new set of customer expectation. How should you think about those and transform them into growth? How do you balance short-term agility with long-term strategy? Because there is no perfect answer for building for growth as such. So you have to think about both short and long-term, which is balance out your forest with your trees. And especially, this is the 4th one where I think will be relevant, especially for people or product people or entrepreneurs who are working with both a high tech and a high touch team. Product management and growth is very different in areas or companies where both these teams come together. Product management, as you know, we have to be at the center of user, business, and technology. But when you have a massively operational business, those teams usually don't understand technology, and the technology teams usually don't understand operations that well. So with all of these things, how do you actually think about growth? So without further ado, let's dive deep in. What is growth? Growth is, first up, I am not a big fan of the way that the early Silicon Valleys who started the word growth itself as a discipline. I'm not a big fan of the way that it has been aped by a lot of Indian companies. What is growth? Growth is not a subsection of marketing. Growth is not just looking at your basic metrics and say, how do I grow my DAUs, or with a very specific focus on notification engagement and getting people to come to your app or your website and do some basic things. It's not even growth hacking. I don't think it's just that. It's definitely not just metrics. I think growth is way bigger than that. It is a mindset. It's something with either you can develop and work towards, or you basically have to leave it to only certain specific people in your company who will take care of growth. And usually those companies won't be like as successful. You can surely have a growth hacking team who will work towards additional growth for your company, but it's something as a mindset, which is extremely important that your product management team has that mindset, which is a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. And what is a growth mindset? I'll just probably elaborate it throughout my presentation, but one way to look at that is that if you have a mindset of somebody who wants to grow, then you will take your failures as an opportunity to grow. You will look back and think about frameworks and fundamentals in like much more detail, versus thinking about, I do not want to fail. I want to stick to a particular plan. I only follow my playbooks that I have always had successful, and so on. We'll get through it in like a lot more detail, but just one thing to get off the bat quickly, which is it is not a particular team. It is a mindset, and it has to be within everyone. And I'll kind of talk about like how you should inculcate in the ways that you are actually thinking about building for yourself. So what typically happens in a particular organization when you're thinking about building for the future? You all have roadmaps, you all have plans, OKRs, maybe for 1 year, what should we do? But it's not actually how things work, which is we don't usually have like a full-fledged plan of and all sorts of measures about thinking, how do we grow the company from point A to point B. So I call it the product death cycle, in fact. So how do most companies, specifically Indian companies, think about building for their roadmap, or what is that cycle? So I call it the death cycle, but you think about it usually like that. Request comes and we follow it like a cycle or a waterfall, which says we need, for example, we start by adding features, and we think about we just need to add even more features that users want. So, which is a great thing. You actually think about consumer backward thinking leads you to say that we should add more features. This is like way, this actually makes sense. Then you actually launch those features and think about, hey, we need bigger launches, which is, for example, if I'm a Swiggy and if I'm launching features like, hey, I've launched Swiggy Pop, or if I've launched an alcohol delivery, which is very recent. So I add features, then I launch it, and I think, wow, we need even bigger launches, and I'll get happy. And I think, hey, it's working. The initial spike in the feature is great. But usually after that, the growth does flatten after the initial spike. And that's what we say is the product manager's curse, is that everything starts looking good. It makes sense. That's why you kept on adding those things. And then you look at, why did we stop growing? And this is where it's an intervention point, because if your answer is going to be, once again, we just need to add even more features that user want. And you go back to one and you keep on like circling through that, and your product eventually gets so bloated that it either becomes unusable, or your previous users who used to love that product start quitting completely. And it's not a great way to actually think about thinking about how do you grow or even build a particular product. So I propose an alternative, that the way to actually think about that, rather than only thinking about looking at your product in situ and thinking about what should we build as a new feature with users want, I encourage most of my product folks or product managers, even startup founders, to start taking a step back, start understanding your business, your category, and your product in totality, and think about growth equations rather than just thinking about a way to, or just avoid the product death cycle by thinking about your own company as an equation. And this equation is, some people or some companies have this equation, for example, notified, codified, and almost something that they really truly believe in, which is think about the overall growth loops rather than just one feature at a time. So think about Uber and Amazon. These are two examples that I take. Just to take a very simple one, for example, in Uber, you could argue that hey, should I add, for example, a particular feature or not? it's not just like, hey, just because users want it. Now you're operating in a marketplace where not only one user, but you have to worry about two very, very different kind of users. And it will be drivers at one end and passengers at the other. And how do you balance that out? For those decisions, you actually need your equation to be very solid, easily understandable, but actually very, very solid, which makes a lot of sense for you. And for example, think about Uber, which is, if I get more drivers, then I will obviously get more geographical coverage or saturation. So if I'll get a lot of geographical coverage, there will be two benefits of that. Drivers will be more available. That means lesser downtime, and they will come to the user faster. So faster pickups. Less driver downtime will mean lower prices, and faster pickups and lower prices both will mean more demand, because a lot of people will be attracted to me. And that more demand in general will translate into even more drivers. So, and this is the equation which kind of works. So adding more fuel to, for example, lower prices is a fundamental to Uber. In a similar way, think about Amazon. Now, these growth equations sometimes actually manifest themselves into much more deeper things that the company has to go after. So I'm not going to explain the Amazon's growth loop here, but think about it. There are three things that Amazon in the commerce world talks about, that we stand for price, selection, and convenience. It's not an accident. Like, not all companies stand for price, selection, and convenience. Nor they should. In fact, if you think about, say, American Express, they will not stand for that. Or even an Uber will not stand for price, selection, and convenience. Well, they will start for, or they will stand for price and convenience, but they will not stand, for example, for selection. There is a grand total of 5 choices that you get on an Uber. You don't get a million choices, and it's completely fine. So it's actually about you thinking not only from in situ, the debt cycle, let's just add more features, etc., understand your business, your category. That's the first point that I wanted to impress upon. And it's not easy. Like, actually, once you get down writing pen and paper and a whiteboard, start thinking about your category, not your company in itself. Start thinking about your category, what grows this category. And once you start writing it down, you will know that this equation kind of doesn't work. It will take a lot of iterations and so on and so forth. It does not work very simply. One good thing that also happens if you write down this equation, or are able to create an equation for your company like this, or a category like this, that it also becomes one of the first principles that your AI or data science team will kind of look at and make them the absolute core principles or axioms on top of which more and more things will come. Otherwise, it's very easy to draw very incorrect or wrong correlations in the beginning, where you optimize for all the wrong variables rather than the ones which are really moving the business forward. That's one. Now, what else? So we talked about growth, the equation itself, but B, from the equation. Now, if you're running an organization which has a bunch of product managers, leaders, etc., there are 4 or 5 things as a culture that you want to set up in your company, so that it just doesn't happen between one person, one product manager, one CEO, but it actually sets as a complete clockwork, a machinery within your company. So there are 4 or 5 things that I kind of think about when from a mindset itself, which is A, you have the mindset, B, you have your equations, but how do you set up growth as a process itself? This is more from a product leadership point of view, which are some of my learnings, that one of the probably most important things, how do you set up the right company structure itself, so that the right people are incentivized and doing the absolute right things for the company. And look, it's not like, of course, every HR person will tell you this, that, hey, you have to set up the right company structure. We'll get down into the details on how do you actually do this, and a couple of ways in which I've tried to do that in Swiggy and even previously in my other companies. Setting up the right culture, the ways of working, the way these teams interact with each other, so that they are driving growth for the company, right? The third one is what we touched upon in the previous slide itself, which is, as leaders, you have to make sure that you have a mastery over your business and category. It's very difficult to almost impossible to grow at a sustained or in a sustained way over a period of months or years if you don't build a mastery over your business or category. It also depends on the risk appetite and the stage of the company and your strategy to deliver. These last 2 are very important and relevant when you think about, if you are not the CEO of the company, usually you will need to also rely on what your leaders think about when it comes to growth. So, for example, a strategy of an Uber versus an Amazon may be very, very different. Zomato versus Swiggy may be very different, or it could be very different across, say, Make My Trip and Clear Trip. It depends on, of course, the strategy to deliver and the risk appetite and the stage of the company. And we'll touch upon some of these things just to get that right off the bat, right? Which is, it's how do you move from a mindset to a process itself. Now, I think of growth in some of these broad buckets, and if you look at what are the buckets in which you can classify the 3 or 4 ones, right? I'd like to think of where would the growth engine for the company, how would the power uh, or what engineering what growth will come through these very different areas. One of them I called innovation, and the other ones are optimizations. Now, a lot of people in product and especially like startup founders would, for example, think about optimizations of things that that kind of not that cool. Innovations are the ones that we have to go after. And that's not necessarily true. And we'll touch upon those as well. But even within innovation, there are 2 different kind of innovation. One is, say, constrained innovation, and the other one is unconstrained innovation. Even in optimizations, there are macro optimizations and micro optimizations. So to give an example, in Swiggy, we have these bunch of different teams working towards, and each team could drive some level of constraint innovation, but a bunch of micro optimizations and so on. And we define what is like overall purpose of each team in Swiggy. And depending on the kind of charters that they work on, the deliverables could be very, very different. So for example, a constraint innovation would be, for example, say a Swiggy Pop, which we launched for a single serve meal for users, where we clearly identified that hey, a bunch of our consumers, they are underserved, they are office goers, they don't have access to good lunch, they have a lot of choice, and for them we need to have like a solution which works in our marketplace, which delivers enough value, and it needs to be cheap. So how will we get that value from our restaurant partners, which is 30% offs, and our delivery partners, and so on and so forth. So it was a constrained innovation, but it was an innovation still. But an unconstrained innovation would be, for example, drone deliveries. So think about optimizations. So optimizations meaning they could be macro optimizations or micro optimizations. Micro optimizations meaning, for example, what you do in say a growth hack equation. So you have like you keep on trying a bunch of insights along with a bunch of hypotheses, and make sure that you're launching very, very fast, and it's hugely analytically driven, but you keep on driving those things. And there are areas in which that is very important. For example, how do you optimize the funnel from a checkout card payment point of view? So that are micro optimizations that go into that, versus a macro optimization. There are like some huge areas that you already have which are working in the company, but how do you take them like 5%, 10% delta up without actually creating new use cases? So with these things, how do you actually set up the right growth engines within the company? So all of this was a background to actually talk about some of the most important things that I talk about, right? So till now I was talking about draw some circles, but how do you actually do that within your company is something that that we should dive into very deeply. All right, so this is an example actually. So what given all of those things, how do we want to drive macro innovations, micro optimizations, and so on and so forth? The important piece is to look at within your company, what are the things that you want to optimize for? So in Swiggy, what we have done is we look at these 5 parameters. The growth is going to come from a whole bunch of other things, but there are these basic 5 principles along which we organize our teams. So we look at impact, confidence, speed, need for quality, and agility. And think about this. So there are teams within the company that you need to go for example, products like a Swiggy Pop or a Swiggy Daily or a Swiggy Alcohol Delivery. In this case, we think about we need teams who are able to execute high impact items, which are along which we have very high level of confidence. If we do this, we will achieve the growth. The speed can be low or medium. It doesn't matter that it needs to be launched immediately. It needs to be well thought through, and there will be a different process for that. But the need for quality is extremely high, and agility shall be low for all practical purposes. They will follow, say, a PR FAQ template, and they will follow a PRD, and they will follow like a very high level of usability testing and so on. And so that's what we call the core team. Versus we also have a team which is called labs, which only works on extremely high impact items, but the confidence on any of those items working is going to be very low, and is completely fine with us. So they will try 10 things, and within those 10, even if one works, that can be a very high impact business for us. And they will, because of the nature of the number of failures that are anticipated or expected out of them, even we want them to launch more and more things at a very fast speed. So the speed is very high, and we don't go for really quality. So for example, what things that they work on may not even be seen on the Swiggy app. They may do a POC elsewhere, and the outcome for them is POC. So in Swiggy, what we have done is like actually created these 4 or 5 different kind of teams, and set the expectation within them that, hey, you are a team which has to focus on medium to high impact or medium high confidence, low speed, high agility, etc., etc. So we were able to come back with 4 or 5 of them. Now compare them with, for example, a new business line team. A new business line team could be when Swiggy launched, say, Swiggy Grocery. In this one, we knew that it was a high impact team, but we also knew that here we did not know how fast we will be able to do it, or the need for quality. How should we be going about doing it? So we definitely didn't want a core team to run that growth engine. We built a completely separate growth engine for them, which was a very, very different team with its own separate engineering, its own separate design, analytics, etc., just working towards finding out what the today's accepted customers' belief is, and how do we have to do this. So this essentially, for example, delivers different kind of optimizations or innovations. And if you are a leader within a company, or if you are a product leader especially, you have to think about like how are these different growth engines delivering what kind of growth that you want, because there is no way that one team or one kind of teams or processes will deliver all sorts of growth. I know that a lot of people here would be working with OKRs as a process and so on, but the way that you write the OKRs is like one part of it, but the other part of it is how do you organize these teams so that they are able to deliver those OKRs in the best way possible, and what is the expectation that you set of them. So for example, in our core teams, they deliver macro optimizations. Our labs, they deliver unconstrained innovations. And for example, our growth team, which is a very small team, it delivers only micro optimizations, right? So this is kind of one way that we set up the teams. Well, what are these bubbles that you see in here? So this is where it all ties back with our strategy. So when, for example, if my leadership team, which is the CEO, CXOs, etc., sits down together with the product leadership, we actually think about all of them together, that this year, how many optimizations or what percentage of our bandwidth should go in optimizations, which are macro, which are important, which are more or less, clearly we have to achieve these goals. These are business metrics that we have committed to the board or are important for a company. And those size of those bubbles will essentially think of them as like the investments that you do, like in the teams and the bandwidth that you would put in that teams. It is also not only the investments and bandwidth, but really the focus of leadership that will go around those areas. For example, in this case, we said that, we do not want micro optimizations in Swiggy for some time. So we crossed that out. To give an example, say a Myntra built a growth team or growth hack team almost 4 years back. So that happens when, for example, that you're out of absolutely big innovations within your category itself. That's when you also have to start focusing on the small items, which in totality will give you, say, a 25, 30%, 40% growth, maybe in 2 years, if that team exists and just keeps on optimizing on a micro level through the growth team. Versus, for example, Swiggy, where for a large part of the last 3 years, it was on a hockey stick curve. And that's where it did not need to actually optimize for every micro experience and so on, because you knew that it was difficult to go wrong because we had such a good product market fit, that the growth would just come from geographically expanding and not by optimizing, for example, your conversion funnels. So you have to really understand which business that you're in, what stage of the company that you're in, and what is the right set of growth engines for every quarter or every year. So all of these things in the bottom, for example, keep on changing as the markets evolve, keep on changing as the category evolves. In some cases, what also happens is coronavirus hits. And once that happens, then all of your basic assumptions just go out of the window. Everything goes out of the window. So you had built your business or category with some fundamental basic assumptions. In Swiggy, for example, we will be building this category with some basic unsaid assumptions even, which is For example, hygiene was a given. People don't give two hoots about hygiene, or people or users would not give two hoots about even looking at the kitchen going inside, because if you actually see many of Indian kitchens, they're not the best, or didn't used to be the best kind of kitchens where you'd like to actually go and see food cooking. Um, for example, some other core assumptions were that everybody chooses for himself. At least our target audience chooses for himself. We understood that tester power is huge, which means that if you're living with a family, if your kid asks you something, the tester power is going to be huge for that, and they will order, for example, on Sunday a pizza or a McDonald's Happy Meal and so on. All of those things, and of course, your basic assumptions around where the supply is open and where the restaurants are open, all of those were there. But in today's world, for example, everything changed. Um, the need for hygiene became way higher. The empathy that the users are now showing the delivery executives is way higher. Hence, uh, uh, when we build the feature of delivery executive tipping, now it makes sense. So that fundamental change. Or, for example, what changed was the pester power of kids reduced and the pester power of parents increased now, because now they are the ones who are actually calling the shots on beta chicken mat khana aaj, or I will not let you do this. If you do that, I will. Earlier, so we were seeing kind of a reversal in in trends here, and because of all of these things changing, we were able to actually respond to this situation because we had built out our core teams around what kind of projects. So the bubbles that you saw on bottom, for example, switched from some of the core teams which were just working on only high impact, high confidence things. Now, for example, they moved to like X team or new business lines. So suddenly we saw that, hey, we have to go for things where we can move with a lot of speed and at the same time quite a lot of impact and confidence in building new businesses. So hence, for example, we were able to move them in a growth engine point of view to a different team, or expand the same team with a different ethos. Okay, then there are some other simple things that can or that should come handy when, especially when you are a growth or when you are a product leader or a growth leader. What I've seen is, or at least what we have done in Swiggy, is that one is the absolute core principles that you follow while you're actually doing this. All the thoughtfulness goes inside with respect to impact and confidence and how should I form these teams and should we run them with OKRs, etc. But it's very easy for some team to actually not think about themselves as the cool teams, or not think about themselves as a, hey, only those folks do the great work. My team is not really important, etc. So we definitely brand our growth engines. So we call them, for example, instead of calling it new business lines, we'll call them new loan shots. Or, for example, when we have the X team, we'll call them growth hacks. Big bets. So we used to call big bets of every quarter. We can take like 5 or 6, or sorry, 10 odd big bets that we want to drive through
और
this.
आज का ही था संडे का, मैंने बोला थोड़ा चीजें सीखते हैं बड़े लोगों से.
Sorry, I'm hearing some.
Yeah, somebody was not on mute, but he was saying that I want to call on a Sunday listening to some big people.
All right, the last one, for example, here is Breaking Bad. I'll tell you why some of these things are important. As product leaders, I think are one of, first and foremost, we are here to sell and influence. Sell meaning not in a bad word, not in the salesy kind of way, but if we have to influence, we are here to change consumer behavior. They were doing something else. You have to do some. Now you want, through your interventions, them to do something else. There is a behavior change that you're expecting. Otherwise, why are we even here? For that, the core absolute fundamentals that are required are the same that are required within the company. You have to influence your engineer by writing a very powerful document called PRD, or you have to influence your leadership by actually putting together a deck that makes all the sense, even though they have been, or they are thinking, or they can be schizophrenic. They can be thinking 20 different things, and they can be very, very greedy, and management is always greedy. But you have to make sense of the world for them, and with the right set of branding for that one. For example, if you brand some decision that you have taken today as like, hey, jaldi banana hai, I want to do something very quickly, and hence I'm accumulating some tech debt. That is a very bad way of actually thinking or branding your technology engines. Instead, for example, at Swiggy, we call them brilliant basics. We know that people don't want to pay off some bad kind of debt that they never even signed up for. But when you are taking big bets every quarter, the focus moves to bets or like quarterly movements rather than things that are going to be important always. By branding them well, you're able to protect them and actually make them really, really work for you. So here's another example for, so I did this deck along with Shivangi, who used to work for me at Swiggy. So the framework that we took about these 5 different parameters and building these kind of teams was valid for example, for Swiggy. But for example, we tried to use that also in different kind of companies. In Khatabook, for example, which recently raised, I think, $60 million, and they are like an up and coming SME company. For example, they they don't have like all of these 5 kind of teams. They have combined some of these teams together, and now thinking about their growth engines, and like, hey, these are the 3 kind of growth engines that will work together. So their X team and growth team are called growth, which are supposed to deliver both, for example, macro innovations and micro innovations. In a similar way, your labs and new businesses they are calling new offerings and so on. So net, what I'm encouraging you to do is actually go back to your company or go back to your own team structure and think about what kind of teams should be delivering what. One of the, I would not say the dumbest ways, but the most basic ways in which teams set up their own organization is a very flat functional teams. This person does Android, this person does iOS, this is a search person, this is a payment person, and so on. And then work and get growth out of them only through some process that they would have put artificially on top. It could be OKR, or it could be big bets or something. But it does make sense if you are thinking about some of these teams in a separate way. I've seen like a lot of great work come out once you are able to clarify what is the outcome that each team has to go for. All right, then the next one, which again is like something that kind of is taking from the first one on your growth equations. For each team, the way in which I encourage, like basically or organize around is through a particular framework, depending on your growth equation. And it's important for you to understand what kind of frameworks that you're in fact using. So just taking an understanding of that one. So most of you would know the funnel framework. It is a basic framework that happens in any website or any app which is selling anything literally, or the AARR framework that Facebook popularized, or some other growth loop framework, etc. So you have to take a lot of help from framework if you want to have growth as a process. So one is the growth around which is the growth engines themselves. But if your product team or the growth team doesn't understand these frameworks, then it's actually going to go back to the basic metrics that they were looking at and not really the overall framework itself. Now, this is a specific kind of recommendation that that works in conjunction with your framework. So remember when I was talking about overall growth loops or the growth equation for your company. The equation for a company or the growth loop in itself will give you one way that gives you a product market fit kind of a growth. And after that, what also happens is you have to keep on optimizing and building for newer and newer things. One good way of building or thinking about what should we be doing is, for example, what we call the creative scientific method. Like if you look at that, how should we be going about setting it up as a process is, for example, you start with an observation. You understand your users very, very properly. But that is just data. So you can look at data, or you can just start with observation. From there, you can look at insights. Like, what is this data really, really telling me? So you can look at like a random person, for example, the way we came up with Swiggy Pop. We used to look at data and say, our consumers, it seems that they're ordering lunches less often, or the average order value is lower. But when we dug deeper into the data, the insight that we got was people are in a lot of hurry, and when they are at office, they don't really have that much time to choose, and so on. So that became our insight. Then you start building multiple hypotheses around that insight. And that hypothesis could be, if we build a feature like that, then these many consumers will start transacting with us even more. And that fits into our growth equation in a good way. And then you move on to experiment or a project, and then actually deliver it. Or you can do an MVP of that one, and so on. And once that is done, you look at observation once again. So this is, while what I was describing may seem like a tough thing, but this is not. It's a very straightforward way. But this is a way in which you can This is nothing but the scientific method. And over a period of time, when you keep on repeating this, what also starts happening is your framework starts evolving, because the information that you would have gotten from a lot of failed experiments or successful experiments will tell you or guide how many number of times your or what kind of levers that actually or levers that moved within your growth framework itself. In some cases, you may need to throw away your framework altogether, especially in times like Corona, when some fundamentals are changing about your business. So it's extremely important, especially at this time, that you go back to your absolute fundamentals, look back at your framework, talk about the absolute basis why your business was built and built in a certain way. What was the bedrock of assumption that you had taken? Try removing those or replacing them with some other assumption and see if that makes sense. Because in today, you cannot rely on data or observation from the past, because your past observation was a reflection of past user experience and user behaviors. In today's world, some of those things definitely are changing already. And in the next 6 to 9 months, if you think that the country is going to change in a certain way, or user behavior is going to change in a certain way, use those frameworks and growth loops appropriately to think about or build newer hypotheses on how your business should be working. So do not stay past of the previous data. It's extremely risky. In fact, one other thing that now we are talking about also is, or thinking about as well, is that should we even be building for optimizations anymore? Is it the time for optimization? So one of the learnings that at least I have is no. Like, you should not be building for optimizations right now. If you're optimizing for your funnels, like, by and large, the answer is going to be do not do that, or it's a recommendation, but of course the answer can be different by your company. Rather than that, focus more on, or think about more observations that you're seeing on consumer behavior changing that can lead to at least micro innovations rather than optimizations. So develop your frameworks. You know your business the best, but if you follow this loop or this process, it should lead you to a great place. All right. While forget Corona, but over a period of time, this is what I was talking in the previous one. Over a period of time, if you keep on repeating this loop, your frameworks becomes over time way better and kind of become very repeatable frameworks. And that becomes not only a framework for your company, but probably for your entire industry. So now, for example, there are solid frameworks in say Amazon, which they know, and they can be deployed as playbooks over like multiple geographies or multiple or different kind of categories and so on. For example, in Swiggy, now we understand the our framework of the loop, but that loop actually helps us now launch either newer categories like grocery by evolving that framework, because a lot of fundamental principle work has been done. Or, for example, take it to other geographies, say if we had to launch in like 500 city and so on. All right, so some of the questions that well, usually I used to get earlier, but I'm not sure that these are the questions that we have to be thinking about today itself. I would rather open it up for Q&A. And while I try to cover only the basic philosophies today, but I really think in the Q&A, a lot of real examples is something that we can be taking. Diwakar, on to you.
Thanks a lot, Anuj. This was very, very useful and very relevant. So if you open the chat, Zoom chat, you will see people have asked questions. So you can just open it. If you share it, people can see that too. And then we can have one by one those people who have written questions that they can directly ask you. So Joseph, can we start with you first? And Uttam, feel free to be involved in this, because I saw that you've also given your views on Joseph's question. So Joseph, please ask your question.
Hey, hi guys. Thank you for giving this forum for asking questions directly with Anuj. Hi Anuj, been a big fan and follower of yours. This presentation was extremely helpful in connecting various dots with your previous presentations. So my primary question is this, like I work in the lending industry, and I'm kind of working right now on a three-way marketplace problem, wherein we work as a lender. There is a merchant or a brand that is a gatekeeper to our customers, and there is an end customer. So some of our growth drivers are in terms of higher approval rates, higher credit limits, and lower interest rate. But if we try doing some of those things, it could impact us as a lender and the customer in terms of the customer's overall growth as far as the credit score is concerned. So what is your recommendation for a product manager who is stuck in this phase right now?
That's a brilliant question. It's it's a tough one. It's never straightforward. Like building for one user, if that was not tough enough, because you can never understand one of your users or different segments of one kind of side of marketplace user itself. If that was not tough enough, you're solving for three different kind of users with different motivations and different kind of need states, and all of that are also changing, right? So that's puts you in a tough spot. But again, I think the way I think about this is two ways. Like one is when you're operating a three-way marketplace or even like a two-way marketplace, etc. And there are going to be different pulls and pushes when you are thinking about a product idea or a particular feature or something that works for this person versus that one. I think of winning or building for any of these things only in terms of wins. So one framework that I use at Swiggy is we say, if we build this feature, how many W's do I get? It's a 1 win, 2 wins, 3 wins, or 4 wins. 1 win means it's only a win for the consumer. Restaurant partners will hate it. Like discounting is a 1 win, for example. Restaurants don't want to do it. Delivery boys don't care. Swiggy will need to like put in more money. We are losing money in commissions. So it's a single win versus 2W or 3W or 4W. For example, Swiggy Pop is a 4W. Everybody is happy in that one. Like the consumer is happy. The restaurant is happy because we give them prediction of what orders are they going to get next week, Sunday, 50 masala dosas. The delivery executive is happy because he can stand there earlier and batch the 5 orders together and deliver. And Swiggy is happy because we created like a differential offering. So I think of that as any feature or other thing, you have to think about the W's that are going to be there. Now, if you're talking about overall company, then you have to like actually think about whether your business model itself is viable. If it is only going to come at the cost of one person's versus the other, because that can take you to a very, very poor equilibrium, which may not be sustainable. So that's a time again to think back on your business model. We usually do that a lot, where if you're building only for single W's in a marketplace, that may really not work in long term. The third one though, to get out of this conundrum is if you are able to segment a kind of user base, and that's where you have to think about specialization. So maybe if you build some feature or maybe your offering works only for the kind of users or only for a very tiny slice of the other piece of the marketplace. So for example, only high credit score or people who would still do it or at least not mind it. And then you have to like start building for or understanding that balance. If I build this, how many people will hate me? And is it okay for them to hate me? Because then I can concentrate only on my small user base. So you have to do that mental work on understanding A, which number of wins that you're going to get. B, if not, then what part of my marketplace am I going to eliminate with respect to segments and just target on that. But do a mental exercise / thought experiment on how does that growth equation still work, and that should make logical sense to you. It's a long answer to a short question.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anuj. Thank you.
Uttam, your question? I think Uttam.
Okay, I can read that question.
Yeah.
For Uttam, right? So Uttam asks, is how do you strike a balance with growth versus profitability? In the name of growth, to keep raising VC money, losses are grown exponentially too. Is there a way to grow profitably and building resilient businesses? So this question is kind of a question which is like, hey, what is the meaning of life kind of question? Well, yes and no. But again, the answer that to all of such questions is it depends. So, well, what does it depend on? So I'll go back to like one of the previous slides that I started on. So look at the last 2 points here. That in fact are the ones that I wanted to talk about in this context, which is what is the risk appetite and stage of the company and what is your strategy to deliver? For example, 2 years back, risk appetite and the stage of the company, if I look at say Swiggy and Zomato, etc. And again, biz/category, right? What is the category looking like? What is the business looking like with respect to say your VCs thinking that, or generally the sentiments in the market that, hey, this category is going to go in a hockey stick growth. A growth and market share capture is the best strategy for this category to go after, or any company within that category to go after. if you find yourself in that kind of a category, the right answer may actually be to focus on growth more than profitability for a short while. For example, if you're still growing like 100% year on year, why would you not? Because if you don't, then somebody else will. And if somebody else will, then it may shrink, especially in a business like, say, a Swiggy, where a lot of our economics also depends on densities. It may be a good strategy for you to go that route, at least to get kind of the hockey stick growth and only during that term. Generally, it is a bad strategy because generally no business is going to grow 100% plus year on year. And if it does, and if you're actually spending even more VC money to buy that growth, well, with every order, you are actually sadder and closer to death, because on your unit economics, you're actually burning more money. And every year you're burning then 2x more money than the previous year, and then 4x more money than the year before. And it becomes a bloodbath and what we call a race to the bottom. Basically, you and your competitor both are trying to die as fast as possible. So again, the answer to it depends also is, if you find yourself in a category which is a gold mine or a gold rush, you can be a little adventurous, but it also depends on the risk appetite of your founders. Some people in this industry, for example, love to be jihadis. They will go ahead and risk burning capital till the time they have 45 days of money left in the bank, and so on. It also depends on, for example, your founders and CEOs and boards generally risk appetite, if they want to take slightly lower. And again, all of this answer was largely based on pre-corona days. I think 99% of the companies in today's world would probably have to figure out a way to grow more profitably rather than grow just for the heck of it, with spending money to grow. Now, you also asked another question here: is there a way to grow profitably and building resilient businesses? And that's where the entire presentation was about that, by the way. But in a way, so this is the graph, for example, which is a growth equation. Well, mature companies actually do an RNG graph, which is a revenue and growth graph. So you have to think about your revenue and growth kind of as an intertwined equation. Where's the money coming from? Where is it going? And then look at all of these things in context, so that it's a very robust business, and you're not looking at these numbers in the end after you burnt a lot of money and have no idea where to now, which levers to pull to get that money back, if that makes sense. All right, next one, Diwakar.
Okay,
go ahead.
Makes sense. Shruti, I think you had a few questions, but I would request you to pick one of your many questions.
I think that I'll take the second one because it's for the larger group. So usually a lot of job postings define growth PM and PM separately. Is there a different skill set required, or is it just it's dependent on the phase that the company is in? It becomes confusing for a newcomer whether this is going to be a marketing role, whether this is going to be a growth product marketing role. So for the larger community, how do the skill sets differ, so that someone who's in the talk right now thinking which direction to go to, has a background on one of these two things, gets a better idea?
Got it. In fact, Shruti, when I started the conversation itself, I was talking about the presentation that I'm doing around growth today is not around traditionally what Silicon Valley companies have defined as a growth product management or growth team or a growth hacking team, etc. While those teams are popular, there's an overlap, but there's a big difference between product managers and growth managers, growth product managers. And in some cases, unfortunately so, because I think every person every product manager is there to drive growth, because nobody is here to drive anti-growth or take you to the negative spiral. Of course, it's a mindset that you have to take. Now, to your question, especially if you are a junior person, if you're looking to enter into product management, for example, or if you're a product manager just trying to build your career in more senior roles, there is a specific difference between these two. I think product managers are overall end-to-end owners of the business and own the equation of the entire thing, whereas growth managers look at probably the top of the funnel and look at driving growth from that point of view, which is your trials, acquisitions, activations, and that part of the funnel. traditionally using a lot of analytics, insights, and data science and experiments. So that's how like that kind of field is defined. I think all of that is almost fully overlapped with the product manager also. So in my head, like that role or the product manager role is slightly bigger, but it does depend on organization to organization. For example, in a Swiggy, we don't have a growth PM. There's a team which does a different kind of growth. So the attributes that we just talked about, we'll still call them product manager, but we'll hire them in a certain team. Versus, for example, there is a team in which much less of those attributes are desirable. For example, a deep domain expertise in search is required, and they will focus on that. And overall today, as a leader, I have to manage like where is what kind of growth coming from. So if you're a product manager who is now just entering this field and thinking what kind of leader do I want to become in the future, you have to take a long-term view. What do you see yourself doing after say 5 years? Do you think that this is the only skill set that I would want to have? Which is, for example, do I want to be absolute best at say Android push notifications and growth channels and things like that? It is a very viable career option. We'll start with that. But I have personally taken the other route, which is more 360-degree product management and 360-degree growth, in which the growth hacking part remains one important, but just one part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shruti.
Sahil Puthi.
Hi Anuj, first of all, a brilliant presentation. It was super insightful for me to learn a lot of things from. Just quickly, I have about 3 questions. I have been a product manager at 2 companies prior, and I'm now running my own company. It's called Keto India. So we've been running profitably for about a year. I actually had questions which are product management questions specific to my context in the startup world, right? Now these are specific to like I have 3 questions. The first question is that the fact that you actually distributed the company roles, like the product growth roles by macro, micro, innovation, X Labs, so on and so forth. I wanted to probably understand a bit more in terms of company growth stage. How should the distribution be like, right? So you gave a really good insight in terms of how the distribution of those bandwidth should distribute by market, how market is changing or how the consumer insights are changing. But I would really like it if you give me some insights in terms of how the distribution should change by company growth stage as well, right? So that is question. The second question is
We have a long list of questions. We'll really appreciate if you pick one of your top questions of the 3. If there's time, we'll come back to your questions.
Sure. Can I answer this one?
All right.
Or try answering this one?
Yeah, it'd be
or
great.
If you
I have the second question that's more important. So it'd be great if the
second. Go on. Please answer this one, and then Sahil can ask the second question as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. The second question that I actually have is that what does a product or a service do when they're actually nearing TAM in terms of what their target area market, when they've reached some kind of stagnation in terms of revenues that they're generating, right? And they want to cater to other markets. This is very specific to the fact that Swiggy launched Swiggy Pop, right? You will be working in different kind of user personas, which I also see Swiggy doing. Is it like incorporating everything within the Swiggy app itself, or launching a new company and then cross branding? I want to understand the right line of thought when you actually near TAM. Like is cross branding the right approach, or building on top of the same brand the right approach? I would love your insights on that as well, Anuj.
Got it. Look, I think there's no overall answer to this one. It will depend on the things that we talked about. It will depend on your the category itself, and not only your company, but actually the category, the way you expect that to behave, and so on. But let me try to answer your question like one by one still, which is like the second one first. So your second question essentially was, how do you distribute your bandwidth around these ones, or when you're hitting or close to hitting target? So for other people's benefit, TAM means target addressable market, right? So when a company has to be paranoid about looking at the target addressable market and what actual share that it has already addressed. Now the other parts may be addressed by competition, and totally like you have to look at overall category itself. What is the growth of the category? Within that context, what is the growth of your company? So, for example, in Swiggy's hockey stick growth, actually, it wasn't that Swiggy was doing something magical every year. For some years at least, like we were building our basics and largely keeping up with the growth because the category was growing in a mad way. So you have to start with how big is the category? Is the category growing, or is it a static category? And it's a gold rush to reach TAM between some competitors together, like trying to get to that pie. And the answer will be different for both. So if, for example, that is truth key, now you're seeing PAM as kind of being static, then you have to start looking at adjacencies actually way earlier in the journey itself. You have to start looking for adjacencies, either categories from which are very near to your current category, where the same users can be cross-sold, or same users, just by the virtue of you being delivering, for example, something, can you cross-sell them something else where they would associate yourself with them? For example, at Swiggy, I can't start selling real estate. Like, that's not what people will. Well, you never know. Make my trip selling food now, so it may be possible, but at least that's not how I think. So you have to look at that. Where is the adjacency, and be within that adjacency. How risky do you want to go? So it will come down to your strategy. Do you want to take measured bets? Then you have to go, and then you have to think that within that adjacency, I will build a proper product and launch it, because I kind of know what the MVP looks like, which will hit a product market fit. Or you say, look, I have just figured out this category, but I have no clue how to attack this one. Then you'll take the labs approach and basically launch within like 2 weeks, put like a lot of like thoughtfulness, and try to build something up very, very fast. But that will be out of your brand, and say, hey, this use case works. It may actually be good on my app or my category. The answer will be, it depends, but you should build a framework on what are your core assumptions, that, hey, this category is open, this category is closed. Do I deserve to be in this adjacency, or what is my right to win in this category if I already have something basic, and so on.
All right, great. Thank you, Anuj.
Thanks.
Okay, next question is from Amrit.
Hi Anuj, good evening. So Anuj, my question is like largely related to, so I work in a company which has a very high, a high touch operations model, and we kind of handhold our clients for the onboarding part. So similarly, like Swiggy, where your delivery partner is the one who, they are huge in numbers, and they are the one who are interacting with your restaurant partners and your customers. So as a product person or a product leader, how do you ensure that the right kind of insights always come back to the team, and you are like always on top of the latest things or latest feedback coming from the from these delivery partners? So what kind of processes do you set?
That's an interesting. I think that's not only true for delivery partners, but it's also true for users, and it's true for restaurants. We have 160,000 restaurants also that are live on Swiggy. Actually, not very different from the number of delivery partners that we'll have. Like, delivery partners will be a little more, and well, users are there in millions. So essentially the question is, how do you stay on top of insights, given especially when people are when you have a large operational arm. So I'll tell you 3 or 4 things. Remember when I talked to you about product operations, there's one of the teams that I lead. There's a reason why, for example, we do product operations at Swiggy, which reports into product and doesn't report into business or operations. So Swiggy has, for example, 500 different cities that we are operational in. Well, not anymore because of lockdowns, but many, many cities. And each city, if you think, like, it is an engine run by a CEO of that city, and the CEO of that city will be a business person, and the product could be used and built in a terrible way. Not built meaning that engine or the machine, the city can be run in a way that overall app, when the user opens it, it could look terrible. It could look very expensive. It could look only 5 restaurants are open. It could look all time surges are going on, etc. If you just kept it in the hands of say a city person who may be operating under a particular threat, or maybe operating for a target of a particular number, and nothing wrong with that. Well, the only thing that is wrong is then your users are not getting what you envisioned as a product person. Your delivery executives are not getting the money that you had, or like the entire experience, and the restaurants are not. So there are 2 ways to at least like get insights from the ground. There's a reason why we build product ops, is actually be extremely close to the reality of what is happening in these different tiers of cities. So at Swiggy, for example, there are 5 different tiers of cities and areas that we look at. And for example, even if you are like one of the central product management teams, you are supposed to like do deliveries, like go on bikes and actually like travel cities and do real deliveries and live like a D for a week, almost, like not like a week, but like for, so we do deliveries and stay at the restaurant for some time, so that you are actually understanding what kind of issues that will happen. when for example there are peaks that are running, if the restaurant at 8 o'clock, what will happen, and so on and so forth. That's the best way. They're literally the best way, which is like be with the consumer. B, I think it's very important that that because I said there is a product operations team, that the product ops team essentially like helps us guide a lot of those decisions, so that we are not hearing from people who are looking at metrics, but people who are actually true to the consumer. So and looking at experiences and looking, or whose job is to actually deliver the best experience rather than deliver only metrics. So we'll look at those insights also. Then there are other places we look at data very, very keenly also, and like slice and dice it to like 10, 12 different, a lot of different ways, and try to build a hypothesis on why it must be happening. So we try to explain that data and build on top of that data a hypothesis. And if that works, then we know that that worked fine. So there are some things that you can do on the ground. There's something that you can only look at data and kind of look build hypothesis for. So in Swiggy, we have tried to build like all of these three engines. The fourth and fifth engines are essentially we do have a customer research team, which is a very strong one, and we are necessarily, we have like different camps across the country, and they keep on moving camps who kind of tell us like these massive movements in consumer insights or user behaviors or delivery executive behaviors and so on from time to time. So, the last one is of course your call centers. You just like go ahead and listen to the calls, look at the chats. Well, there are tens of thousands of those. You will be able to find that out. I think the answer but that all of these may be answers for Swiggy on how do we collect data. The answer may be very different for you guys. So think about how can you do both high touch and high tech at the same time to get insights also, just like we are building products.
Yeah, thanks, Anuj. It is. I think it takes a lot of iterations to finally get to that point. So let's see how it goes about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a product manager's biggest personality trait is empathy, and in some cases you will need to not only like ask them on what they're feeling like a robot, but actually feel, empathize, kind of what do you call like the sonar module inside you, like what they are saying but what they're not saying, but you are kind of able to understand, build hypotheses, and move on.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Abhishek Day.
Hi, thanks Diwakar for giving me the option. Hi Anuj, so I'm part of a B2B SaaS company, and we have couple of products in place. We want to come up with new products and basically come up with a loon shot or big bets sort of thing. Just wanted to understand from you, is there a particular direction or a framework which could be given to the product managers, or could we ask them to, we can ask them to follow the framework to approach this particular problem?
What is the problem? That's a great thing, right? That you want to take loon shots or big bets.
Correct. So how do we go about doing that? So few of the things which I learned from the session is that we have a dedicated team with, giving that, okay, let it be the confidence score, the agility and all of those things. Some of those things are in place still. Is there any other, is there some framework where we can, so when you're talking about the constraint, that it is a constrained experimentation, non-constrained experimentation.
Right.
So how do we go about those things? If it can help me in some way.
Got it. So let me answer you, Abhishek, first thing. So you can teach product managers a lot of things and build frameworks for that. I still haven't found a good framework for dreaming yet. Not something that I can talk about. So when you're taking a big loon shot, or well, it's not easy to take frameworkize it and make all of your product managers like big dreamers. And the right amount of dreamers, in fact, because you want to launch them and like get commercial benefits out of that also. The right answer there is get the best kind of people. These frameworks are there, whichever I talked about, are the frameworks to make sure that the right amount of, or that the right set of people are working for the right kind of problems, and you are helping them achieve those things within the company's bandwidth. And B, you are able to upwardly manage your leadership, that hey, we want to take X number of big bets and Y number of loon shots, and not overdoing one quarter with only loon shots or only optimizations and so on. So those tools and frameworks are for those areas. But if your question was, how do I teach my product managers to come back with the right or best set of ideas? That's not something that we covered today. That's a very different territory, but we should probably do once, Diwakar, something like that. I'll be happy to join in if you're doing something like that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
why not?
It would be
Maybe,
wonderful.
maybe sometime next month.
Sorry, what is that, Devakar?
Maybe sometime next month we can maybe do a panel on that topic.
That'll be fantastic. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sankalp.
Yeah. Hi, Devakar. Hi, Anuj. It was a brilliant presentation. Thank you for that. So my question is around the fintech companies like PhonePe and Paytm Freecharge, who are working on building a super app and integrating other products and apps. So mostly because they do not own the core product and just integrating a app which is already there in the market. So in such companies, how do the growth function work there? Are they more, inclined towards growth hacking, where you said that working on acquisition campaigns through push notification, email, and all?
Difficult to say because I have not looked at their growth teams just yet, and I don't think they have, or the frameworks are as robust or solid. I don't actually know, but maybe there are. What is your okay? Let me repeat your question back to you. Is your question largely that there are companies in which there is less differentiation between each other, the competition is large, but at the same time everybody is trying to become a super app, and there is no differentiation, and what is the end outcome? What are they like? How are they then trying to grow? Is that a good articulation of your question, Sankal?
Correct.
Right. Look, there happens like some cases in the not in the history, but like in the journey of like building startup, there happen some cases, especially in B2C companies, even in B2B nowadays, where some companies start with reach. Like they just start with, I want to reach everybody that I have to with a very, very basic core proposition. And with that core proposition, and then after that, they try to see that, hey, what is the best way to kind of engage these people? So they start with what you call they become a one-trick pony for some time. They have one thing that works well for them. And usually is something that is true for basically everyone. Like payment is like used for everything, right? So even if you think about Google, information is used for everything. So its kind of reach is huge. So they get to the reach part very quickly, but they also find themselves a little troubled because now on top of that, there is no business case also. So then I have this reach, and the basic hypothesis becomes that if I become a super app, then because of my trust, because India is a trust deficit society, because of my trust, a lot of people will start using my app for a whole bunch of things. That's the hypothesis. I don't think that there's a proven business model just yet in India which has been able to do that, because I don't think Indians are behaving in the way Chinese have, which is like WeChat and kind of like these 2-3 companies have aggregated like all of the use cases together on their master apps. India is not behaving that way. India is behaving more like the US, where like horses for courses. If I need this, then I'll go there. If I need WhatsApp, then I'll do WhatsApp. But if I need TikTok, I will do TikTok. I'll not want an app which does both TikTok, WhatsApp, and gets taxi for me. At least that's not something that that in India I've seen. Or there's another reason which is kind of a debatable one, but Devakar probably we should do sometime separately also. Is in India, e-commerce came, not e-commerce, like a lot of internet consumer internet companies came from the US with respect to the way they were doing. So we used to ape West a lot earlier. So for example, Flipkart was trying to do what an Amazon was doing, or MakeMyTrip was doing what, for example, somebody else was doing there, etc. And the sensibilities of Indians who were early adopters for consumer internet was similar to Americans rather than Chinese. Also, what helped them, or what is not helping us, is our script. Like English is not a great script. Like Chinese is like a very powerful script. Like with one small alphabet, you can communicate a lot more than you can in English. So a lot of these considerations kind of go why super app will work, will not work, etc., etc. But I think that's what these companies are trying to do in a way, hoping against hope. But I really hope something works out. There is a lot of innovation pending. I've recently seen Flipkart doing videos and Indian Idol kind of shows and so on also.
You have rightly said it, Anuj, on India has been a very strong services country in terms of tech, and last 5 years, 7 years, we have seen that trend moving so much towards product, because we are learning that a lot of things that would work here would need to be built by looking at users inside. Like if you're building a Swiggy for India, you have to build a Swiggy for India. You have to know, and that too will vary. Like you have touched it, you have seen it how to go to 500 cities. It changes inside India also so much. So
India is not one country. Yeah. India is like some 25 countries at the least.
Yeah, so it's not applicable at all now where India is with all the mobile penetration, with all the internet penetration, with all the sense, and with all the big companies that have established in India. Now there's little need for any validation from West also. That's sort of an opinion that I have on Indian tech right now. And over the next 4 to 5 years, we'll see a lot many product companies coming out for India, which will build not just for India, but for other places like Africa, Southeast Asia as well.
I 100% agree. And I think in the last, and it's a recent change. I don't see, so I don't know how many people don't realize this. It is a very recent change. Like in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been amazing. And so there are a couple more hypotheses also. Like I know like many of you are product managers here, but and even for those who are not, I feel for you. Product management and product building is actually way harder in India than it is in the Silicon Valley. We did not inherit the culture of innovation. We did not inherit the culture of people understanding that failures happen. Most of our business counterparts, for example, also would come not from an entrepreneurial or a consumer internet entrepreneurial background, but from, for example, from FMCG companies and so on. So we have it a little tough. But at the same time, we are also starting from, like, the product managers are also starting from not like that kind of skill set. So there's a gap that needs to be bridged. But I think in the last 5 years, a lot of that has been bridged. I see a lot of way more thoughtful product managers who are almost as entrepreneurial as the CEOs themselves. So very, very happy to see that moment. Well, there's a question from Deepti that I will very quickly answer.
Before Deepti, there's a question from Pravendra also. Let's answer that and then we'll come to Deepti's question. Pravendra?
Thanks, Diwakar. Hi, Anuj. So my first question was a rather silly question. I just wanted to know if POP and Delhi are considered part of the core umbrella that you mentioned. Mainly, I wanted to understand if there's a team restructuring also happening when a new product line or a problem space emerges. And then also, when does that transition happen? I was thinking that for different umbrellas, because the factors like agility, etc., you mentioned. So I just wanted to know if this also is there in Swiggy too.
Absolutely. I think while you talked about like POP and Daily, think about the overarching theme that I said here, Pravendra. So while I can answer what exactly happens in POP and Daily, but are they part of the core? We relook at the entire set of or entire suite of products or product lines that we have, and once every couple of, or so basically twice a year, etc. I basically try to do a zero-based thinking whether it still remains here or it should move somewhere else. With COVID hitting, I think some of the things that you said that, for example, should we bring like more things into core? But I also look at like how many things should be sunset. POP is gone and Daily is gone now, and they will come back when the time is good. Because now I know that the real estate that POP was occupying for a lot of time, and rightfully so, because it was solving for a big use case for office goers and choice. People don't want to go through a lot of choice. But in today's world, where office goers are not going to office, and grocery needs its right place in the consumer's mindset, so POP has temporarily given its way to grocery. So we had to respond by agility on that also, rather than thinking about them as core services or not. So routinely, we keep on sunsetting core services, or at least moving them to a temporary bucket and bringing them back to core when the time is right.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
So we have 3 more questions left, Anuj. Let's move to Deepti's question.
Deepti's was the easiest one, hence I was thinking that we should ask it. But anyway, when is a good point in product company lifecycle to or stage to start thinking of growth seriously? Deepti, always, and we have to be paranoid about growth. If you're not paranoid about growth, either you'd be degrowing or somebody else will come and take your cake. It is It is super important, but it's there is no when. There is no question of when, and hence, if you look at the theme throughout my entire presentation, that's why I don't want to talk about growth only in terms of growth hacking, but overall thinking about the company's growth as like a very key thing. The company is trying to grow, and like that's what the company exists for. You want to solve a major consumer problem, you want to grow, and you want to like give a lot of value back to either society or shareholders and so on. Growth can't be an afterthought. It has to be ingrained. It's a mindset. So answer is always.
Makes sense.
Thank you, Anuj.
Bhupendra, I think he's asking a similar question.
How does growth hack work for very early stage startup or where there are very less data points as there are not many customers? Well, there's no overall answer, but if I had to take a choice, I would not choose hacking in the early stages when you do not have a product market fit. The first thing that you have to try to find out is a product market fit. You don't even start with growth hacks and so on. Maybe it will distract you. So get a product market fit, and probably answering to Deepthi also, the only exception when you don't think about growth is when you don't have a product market fit. Till that time, the only job that a company has is to find a product market fit, where you have found a product that consumers will pay for. So that's one. So in very early stage startups, I don't think you have any product market fit. You have no right to do growth hacking at that time. Not only less data points, but it is just not a worthwhile use of your time.
Makes sense. Also, it's as you explained in the talk, it's more about the mindset and about the process. So even if there are no big traction and you're still figuring out, building up that mindset, building up that method of looking at how you are acquiring, what kind of users, what kind of segment, right. Even at a smaller number, you should think about it the way you have answered it. Like an analogy to that would be that if you don't have a lot of money, should you manage your finances well or not? You still have to think about the allocation of whatever little money we have in different.
Yeah, that's a great analogy here, Diwakar. So I was just responding to the growth hack part, which is micro optimizations before PMF. That's
exactly
the only distinction that I want to do.
So we have one last question from RP Rati. Prati, I don't know what the name.
Hi, this is Pratik here. So that's my alias for this. So I just wanted to understand if you follow some certain frameworks or models when you prioritize your steps for across businesses. So be it core, you follow some prioritization logic, be it non-core features, you follow some other prioritization projects. Or is there some other factors that you consider while you choose?
Well, I do follow, as you may have known by now, I actually use framework for a lot of things. Like frameworks are great because they solve. Every time you're not starting to solve the 100% problem, you basically have solved 30% of the problem because you have frameworkized it. Of course, every situation is unique, so you have to look at it from that perspective and not let the process of the framework dictate you, but make sure that it works for you. So the way I like to do it is in a three-way kind of a scenario. One is company level prioritization. You're talking about use case level prioritization, but actually, just stay on with me here. A company level prioritization is when we are discussing, for example, with leadership and the board, next year, what do you think the company should be focused on? And that will happen only in 4 buckets, at least in the industries that, or in actually most of the industries. So how much will we actually work towards bettering the customer's experience? How much will be focused on our competitors and agility? So if they do some random move here and there, what will we do? Do you want agility, or do you want us to continuing on improving the experience? The third one is how much would you want to work on economics, or actually it's not only economics. I put kind of stability, economics, basically company stability and economics in the same bucket. So it could be technological stability, it could be economic stability, it could be unit economics. How much do you want to invest in that? And the fourth one is how much do you want to change the future? So things that nobody has thought about. So I like to prioritize in these 4 at the leadership level. Say, and for example, then if you're a product leader, you give 100 focus points to your CEO, and just making this up, and say, where do you want to put these coins? I could give you a roadmap that is 60% awesome on customer experience. If you think we are like doing terribly on customer experience, everything else is going to be wastage anyway. And here is how the company would look like in the next 1 year if we put 60% of our energy, time, focus, money, everything in this part. The risk here is, of course, then we would not be focused on like reinventing the future. We would not have reached like great economics. We would not be responding to competition. And maybe this year looks like competition is not going to be in big moves. So that's outcome one. Outcome two could be we are like very balanced, that we are 25-25 here and there, or third one, etc. So because product leaders usually do have a sense of what is cooking up within the company, what other discussions have happened with the with the investors, what ideas that the CEOs have come up with, and everything else, right? So that's the first level of prioritization that you do with the leaders themselves. Where do you want to put in that money? Once you have these buckets cleared, after that, then you think about, hey, then you, within those, if you can have themes, which is your core or labs or this or that, etc. And it could be like a business specific this thing also. For example, in Swiggy, we will have customer and delivery executive and restaurant and so on. Like it will be different. We can do that. The third level of prioritization is what I usually try to do with RISE, which is your reach, impact, confidence, effort. But I use a very specific formula for that. I optimize for highest ROI. So I use R into I into C square divided by E. So like high on confidence. It should be very, very clear that it is going to work or it is not. And it's fine. You can, but the framework is nothing but a way for you to have great conversations. The conversation is where the value is, not the frameworks themselves.
Yeah.
And then you can prioritize.
Yeah, got it, Anuj. It gives you a lot of perspective and generates a lot of food for thought going ahead. Thank you.
So we have one last question coming from Srish, I think Srishti, or do you want to ask your question, Srish, you?
Yeah, actually it's Srishti here. Hi Anuj, I think I've been following you for quite some time, and this was a great presentation, or probably it's a great picks that I took up from here, especially on having your team split across different roles. But having said that, let me make it in a very generic fashion, wherein I wanted to know that when you have these teams aligned, there is always a success metric for anything that you do at the end of whatever you deliver. So is there like, numbers that are attached to it? And if yes, do you strive to make it 100% post-release? Because it has a time with it.
Your question has a lot of basic assumptions that is leading you to ask this question. So of course, when you're saying that when you pick up a macro constraint view, how do you come up with success metrics? I think it's a direct answer from if you understand your growth equation. If your company has a growth equation, then you have your success metrics also. It should be your OKR should be based on those success metrics. That's one. B, I think, and that's getting increasingly true in complex marketplaces. It could be a content marketplace where you have to balance out two different kind of users, say creators and consumers, or it could be a marketplace like Snapdeal, or it could be a marketplace like Swiggy. It's a three-way marketplace, right? In different kind of marketplace, for example, if you are going to be just slave to one level of metric, like if you're just looking at consumer metrics, it may never give you a full picture. So you have to define your metrics and your check metrics in a right way. And in one way, you have to also think about whether OKRs themselves are a right way to do that or not. So we are getting into like a deep rabbit hole when you are asking about that question, which is, do you strive to reach that metric? There is an inherent assumption that I define metric very clearly and make sure that those metrics are absolutely hit. Whereas in businesses where consumer behavior is changing very, very fast, I do not want to be slave to those metrics, but I want to look at those metrics very seriously and let them guide my journey overall. But at the same time, I would want to strive or overhit those metrics even 100%. One way to also look at that is when you're a product manager. So for example, if I'm building a particular feature on POP, right? It's a simple one, but I don't look at overall POP metric. I will ask the product manager to write down 20 assumptions. If 100 people came on this page, what will happen? How many of them will tap on this button? How many of them will do that? So the entire modeling needs to go out there. And I'm not so focused on the final metric because it's a business metric, but I'm focused on the entire assumption funnel and each of the assumptions that go into the model. And that, for example, is where the maximum amount of value is.
Okay. So basically, it's like splitting up your core metrics to small chunks so that you know that where you're heading to, and you know that
Correct.
you will reach there.
Correct. And the product manager has to like literally think about all of those 20 or 40, whatever those things are, with a lot of gut. So over a period of time, when you build, when you keep on building products, it's great if you are able to take bets on those metrics ahead of time itself. And when finally when the product launches and you see, oh shit, my metrics are like completely here and there, then you know that which of those 20 assumptions went wrong, and that's how you improve as a product manager. Also, that's necessarily your assumption on how the market will behave if I launch something.
Got it. That's great. I think thank you so much. This was super detailed for me, although my question was very wide. So yeah, thanks, Anuj.
Thanks, Rishi.
So Anuj, are there any closing thoughts that you want to share?
Closing thoughts. Actually, I shared a lot of those during the presentation itself. The one thing that I want to like share with product managers and leaders generally is that guys, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity where a lot of fundamentals are changing. So a lot of yarn that you would have heard earlier may not be now truly valuable given, or maybe it is if your industry is like that. So try to think of yourself as as people who are the most fundamental thinkers within the company, and true leaders, and not only executors within the company. So if you are already working on some projects, seriously try to relook at which were the core assumptions that you took, why you are doing that in the first place, and given all of the things that are happening, how do you modify it, or will you junk it, or do new things? There will be a lot of opportunities for the best product people and best products to come out in the market in the next few months. You really don't want to miss out on any of those opportunities for you or for your company. But you have to, in a lot of cases, junk your previous assumptions, and don't take anything as an article of faith. Relook at what you are working on. So that's like very only a timely advice. Usually I wouldn't give that advice 100% of the times, but it's my advice for today.
Thank you so much, Anuj. Everybody, can we have a quick round of applause for Anuj? That's the max we can do to the episode. And it's been a great session, Anuj. I think all the points and all the questions and the way they were answered, they were brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thanks a lot, Devakar, and creators of product for hosting me, for having me here. I loved interacting with the audience. The questions were super thoughtful. I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so add me up there if you have any more follow-up questions. I will try to answer, and let's stay in touch. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Anuj.